Phoenix, or X-Men Dark Phoenix, depending on what you want to call it, is the final installment of the long and storied X-Men franchise. This franchise has been around since the year 2000, yeah, since I was like 8 years old or whatever. We've had X-Men movies. If you've been following this franchise and you've been watching this new rebooted trilogy of movies that they just came out with, then you should know all the particulars, or at least you should know most of the people that are going to be in this movie. James McAvoy returns as Professor Xavier, Michael Fassbender returns as Magneto, Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique. Also, Jessica Chastain is in this movie. Sophia Turner, aka Sansa Stark, is in this movie as Jean Grey. Ty Sheridan as Cyclops. Nicholas Hoult as Beast. I mean, you know, the whole crew is here. So the basic premise of this movie is adapting the Dark Phoenix storyline from the X-Men comics. The story centers around Jean Grey on a mission to space. She comes into contact with something cosmic, something that awakens or maybe gives her some kind of latent Phoenix powers. When I say Phoenix powers, I mean a dark and destructive force that gives her, like, it makes her like the most OP mutant on the face of the earth. She becomes very volatile, very unpredictable, very uncontrollable with these powers, and the X-Men have to try to reel her in, have to try to figure out a way to help her out of this situation. At the same time, there's some rando villain in the movie played by Jessica Chastain who's there to kind of... I'm actually not sure what she was doing in this movie. Either way, we have the final Fox X-Men movie on our hands, and time to talk about it. Yay! There are plenty of reasons to hate this movie, especially if you're a diehard X-Men fan, and especially if you're a fan of like continuity and things like that. At this point with the X-Men movies, you kind of have to accept that the continuity is not going to make a lot of sense. Personally, when I walked out of this movie, I found that there were some things to enjoy. There were some things that I liked. It doesn't make it a good movie, but it just means that I didn't walk out of it wanting to annihilate this movie from the face of the earth or anything. If you felt that way, I totally get it. But here, I'm just giving my opinion, and I thought the movie was okay. For starters, I'd like to commend the actors in here. A lot of the actors in this movie are actually trying to give really good performances. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender are tremendous actors. Jennifer Lawrence is a very talented actress. They're all committed. They're all trying to give a good performance in this movie. Mostly succeed. There are some moments where you feel like stronger direction probably could have helped their performance, but in the end, I walked away feeling like the performances all around were pretty solid. I've seen online a lot of people are criticizing this movie because they say the actors don't really want to be here and you can kind of tell with their performances. I'll be honest, I didn't really get that sense from this movie. It felt like they were trying to end it the right way. I'll also say that the movie visually is about hit or miss. Like, there are some moments where there's really good cinematography, there's really great shots, and there's really beautiful looking scenes where you're just kind of like, man, okay, I can see the greatness there. And then the rest of the time, the movie visually is just kind of bleh, yeah, who cares? But honestly, when the visuals for this movie hit, it is something beautiful. You know what is beautiful that always hits in this movie? The soundtrack. Hans Zimmer. Man, Hans Zimmer was in his bag on this score. This score slaps. And when I say slaps, I'm talking about Ike and Tina kind of slapping. Like, this score was really, really good. This is one of those movies where you're watching it and then stuff is happening, you're not that interested, but then the musical score comes in and it just elevates that motherfucker. Like, it just pushes it beyond a level that it could have gotten to. Some of the action scenes are actually not that bad. There are actually some really cool displays of power that the X-Men show in this movie that I thought was pretty awesome and pretty badass at times, especially in how the X-Men use their powers in conjunction with each other. I thought that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, when I walked out of this movie, I couldn't help but sit there and think, like, damn, what was the point of watching any of that? Like, what was the literal point? Once again, we have an X-Men movie that is also written by Simon Kinberg, who also, I think, wrote The Last Stand back in the day, that fails to do the storyline of the Dark Phoenix justice. I suppose if I get into spoilers, I could nitpick the shit out of the ins and outs of how good or how bad it is an adaptation compared to the comic book. I'm just gonna sit here and tell you guys, as a film, this movie is just very bland. It's very boring. There's not a lot that happens in it, which is kind of weird because for the first act or so of the movie, I was kind of on board. The longer the movie went on, the more pointless I started to realize things were. This movie just feels chopped to the cutting room floor. Ever watch a movie and it feels like a large majority of it is nothing but reshoots? Like, okay, Justice League, okay, that's fair. I remember sitting back in the theater and I was just like, holy crap, this entire movie feels like a reshoot. What the fuck? The schedule of this movie got thrown off by Disney acquiring Fox, and so you can definitely tell there are scenes that are missing. Scenes feel tacked on in some places. The entire movie feels like a reshoot. The characters and the storylines and the motivations of everyone involved feel like reshooted type of ideas. Characters just pop in and out of this movie with little to no relevance to the plot depending on what the story needs from it at that moment. I spent a majority of this movie just sitting there going, holy shit, why is Magneto in this movie? Why is Magneto in this movie? Same thing with Magneto applies to a bunch of other characters in the movie where you just sit back after the movie and you go, why were they in this movie? Like, I don't really get it. That exact thing applies to Jessica Chastain. Jessica Chastain as a villain in this movie, boring as shit. There's nothing really interesting or fleshed out with her character. Her villain just feels like she's there, and she's just there to, I don't know, occasionally propel stuff forward, or maybe she's just there for the final action sequence. I don't know. I feel like a large majority of her screen time was pointless. Because her screen time felt pointless, it dragged the pacing of this movie down to hell. Like, it just kicked it off the cliff and drug it screaming and kicking all the way to the gates of hell. It's a very poorly paced, inconsistently shot movie with very poor direction from Simon Kinberg at times. Sometimes it's a movie that feels like it has no style or creative flair of its own. It just feels like things are happening. In fact, I probably would call it that. It's Dark Phoenix, shit's happening. Like, that's basically the tagline for the movie. Nothing is as fleshed out or as in-depth as it needs to be. Relationships aren't fleshed out. Motivations aren't fleshed out. Motivations change at the drop of a dime, again, depending on what the story needs. In the end, I walked out of this movie feeling like, I mean, it wasn't offensively bad, at least not to me. There were some parts of it that I liked, but it's definitely one of the weaker X-Men movies. In the end, this was a bad movie that had some good parts in it, so I will say that it's a guilty pleasure movie and put it in Smallville. Those are my thoughts on Dark Phoenix. Have you seen it? What did you think about it, and where do you rank it among the X-Men films? In fact, tell me what your ranking is of all the X-Men films in the comment section below. Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show. Stay tuned for more videos, and if you like what you see, tell me how you feel, and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.